Welcome to the Taylor Made Tasty podcast. I'm Taylor, retired serial quitter turned goal boss coach, speaker, and consultant. I believe a beautiful life starts with a beautiful mindset. Join me as we amplify confidence, resilience, and actionable tools on the road to quit quitting on you and your vision. You are worthy of your goals, so let's go get there. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Taylor Made Tasty, the podcast. Today's episode features a guest by the name of Reneau Peurifoy, and we will be discussing the argument that anger can actually benefit your life and be your friend and your ally. We also conquer some conversation around what anger is and how it is related to setting boundaries and assertiveness. A little bit about our guest. Reneau Peurifoy holds a master's degree in counseling and was in private practice for 20 years specializing in anxiety disorders. He is the author of many books, Anxiety, Phobias, and Panic, Taking Charge and Conquering Fear, and Anger, Taming the Beast. Audio versions of both have been released and are now available at audible.com. He is the author also of Overcoming Anxiety from Short-Term Fixes to Long-Term Recovery. His newest book that will be released at the beginning of 2023 is Why You Feel the Way You Do. Reneau also has developed a YouTube channel that features videos on very practical life skills. Please help me in welcoming Reneau, and let's get into it. Hi, Reneau. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I am personally intrigued by the topic today surrounding some surprising benefits of anger, if you will, because I definitely think that this concept is not something you hear about often, right? The argument that anger can actually be a friend and an ally, when most often I think anger is seen as negative or detrimental in some cases. So can you break down the idea that this can work for us and explain which way angers can benefit our life?
Sure. And I think the place to start is to talk about what are we talking about. When you look at affective neuroscience, they've identified 7 core emotional circuits that we share with all the other mammals. And 2 of them, which relate to what we're talking about today, are anger and fear. When we talk about these circuits, fear, we're talking about a broad spectrum of emotions from just apprehension to terror. And with anger, it can again range from just irritation to rage. It's just how high the dial is turned up. But it's the same basic emotion, even though we have, literally hundreds of different words that describe the different levels of anger and fear. So they are triggered when we are threatened. And all mammals, when you threaten them, they either become angry or afraid, depending upon how they assess the threat and their ability to meet it. So if you feel the threat's going to be too much for you, you become afraid and want to get away from it. If the threat is manageable, then I'm going to attack it and get rid of it. And attack may simply mean, in our conversation here today, taking some assertive action. Mm-hmm. So all emotions are messages. They're messages about needs that either are being taken care of or that are lacking or that a threat. So when you think of emotions as messages about needs and threats, then it becomes important to understand what that message is. So if you're angry, and again, irritation is just low-level anger, that means at some level there's a threat. And it could simply be that there's traffic in the way. It could be a threat to my sense of who I am as a person. It could be a physical threat. Threats can be any of those types of things. So the first step with managing anger well is understanding that, okay, if I'm irritated or angry, what is the threat? Is it real? Or is it because of my unrealistic expectations or something from the past that's getting triggered? And then if it's real, am I taking actions that are going to minimize that threat with the least amount of harm to myself and others? That's what we would call an assertive approach. And then if it's not a real threat, then why am I getting angry? Is it because, again, I have some unrealistic expectations, some irrational thoughts, some should-must thinking, or is it some triggers from the past that are being fired up and because of the situation? And if that's the case, then I need to take some work on myself. If you look at people that deal with anger well, one of the first things they tend to do is they do nothing so that they get a chance to regain their logical ability. Because when emotions first flare, especially if they flare intensely, you lose some of your reasoning ability and you start just acting on kind of an unconscious level of whatever you learned when you were a kid. And so people that deal with anger well, the first step is basically to stop and take a look at it and assess it. Is there a real threat? And then how am I going to deal with this? And sometimes you may need to take a lot of time depending upon the type of threat. In fact, when you work with people that have explosive anger, that's the first, like, for example, domestic violence situations. The first thing you want to lock into place is a walkaway strategy. So that's would be an extreme form of stopping, right? So I think that's the first step is I need to evaluate where is my anger coming from? Is there a real threat? And then if it is, what do I do with it? And if not, what's going on inside of me that's triggering it?
Yeah, absolutely. So is the part where you are reflecting on what's going on, is this a real threat? Is that the start of the friendship or allyship with anger? Because I guess that's the hard part to kind of like wrap your head around is like, how does this become my friend when so often, we do see it as a negative thing?
Well, we get into this whole conversation about assertiveness, right? Whenever you assert yourself, the energy and motivation to do that is anger. I mean, something's bugging you. And so I speak up and I set some limits. That's that anger circuit inside of you, giving you the energy and the motivation to take action. And I think that's the positive side of it. Any kind of limit setting that you do is basically anger forcing that. And that's the key is if you could act when anger is at its low level, then you usually will take appropriate actions. To use maybe an example from parenting, right? You've got a child who's misbehaving. And so some parents do the shooing flies, right? I've told you. Now, I told you not to do that. How many times I have to tell you? At some point in time, the person gets up and acts, right? If you get up and act early on, you'll take more effective action. If you wait until that anger has gotten to a really high level, that's your action point, then you're going to do something that's irrational. So when there's something going on, some anger, lowering your action point so that you take action early on while you still have all your reasonability is part of how you harness that energy in a more effective way. People that have difficulty dealing with anger, or maybe they suppress their anger, a lot of times they have to wait until it gets to a very high point before they act on it. People that are uh, able to act early on will tend to take more effective action. So I think that's the key to making it your friend. And maybe we could talk for just a moment about assertiveness. When you look at assertive behavior, we're really talking about conflict resolution. And whenever there's two or more people together, there's conflicts. I want to go have Chinese food. You want to go have Mexican food. There's a conflict. How do we resolve it? That's a very simple one, right? I want to watch this program. Your wife wants to watch that program, right? Uh, so conflict resolution, and we can look at it on a continuum. At one end of the continuum, we have a non-assertive behavior. I take care of your needs. I forget about mine. On the other end of the spectrum, we have aggressive behavior. I'm going to take care of my needs. I don't care about yours. In the middle is this thing we call assertiveness, where let's see if we can come up to a mutually satisfactory solution, something where you get a little bit of that pie, I get a little bit of pie. Now, again, this is a continuum, and your solution can slide from one end to the other depending upon the situation. There are times when being non assertive is very appropriate. If I'm in a situation where somebody's got a gun on me and he wants my wallet, probably I'll be very non assertive and just give him the wallet, right? If there's a situation where my child's in danger, I'm going to be much more aggressive about taking care of that. So, depending upon the situation, all of these behaviors can be appropriate, and some people, unfortunately, only have certain behaviors. Maybe they're only non assertive, or maybe they're only aggressive, and they don't have that full spectrum to use depending upon the situation. And again, depending upon where you live, if I live in China right now, where everything I'm doing being monitored and there's a very dictatorial government, probably a lot of non assertive responses are going to be appropriate. In our country, we have the freedom to be much more assertive in most of the situations we're in. Unfortunately, a lot of people are raised in families or situations, come from cultures where they only have either non assertive or aggressive behaviors that they solve most of their problems with. So, learning to be assertive, I think, becomes really important. And that's, again, understanding that that anger is part of what's going to drive that assertive behavior if you tune into it and act on it early on while you still have all your reasoning abilities with you. So that's, I think, the key to how you make it. Just looking at it differently. I mean, most people will say, "Yeah, I get irritated, but I don't get angry." Well, it's the same thing, right? It's just where is the dial turned up. So understanding that when I'm irritated, I need to decide what I'm going to do about it rather than waiting and sitting on it. If I sit on it, that irritation is telling you there's a need that's not being taken care of or a threat that exists. And so if I keep sitting on it, it's going to keep building and pushing at me until eventually I will take some action. And if I let it build too long, it's going to be inappropriate anger. So that's, again, part of how you listen to the message early on and take action early on.
My audience and community are filled with people who want more out of life, who want to grow, see their massive vision. And when they're setting up these big, audacious, unreasonable goals, as I like to call them, many emotions come into play. Arguably, anger being one of the most
Right.
common ones, but at ourselves. Like maybe we're not taking enough action towards a goal, or some self sabotage comes into play, and that can create some anger and resentment towards ourselves. So when it comes to goal setting, can you offer some insight into how anger can come into play, but for a positive outcome?
Well, and again, if you are getting angry at yourself because you not feel you're reaching your goals or you're self-sabotaging, that's going to help motivate you to take some action. So take a look at your goals, take a look at maybe how you're self-sabotaging, and oftentimes a third party who can be objective doesn't necessarily not need to be a counselor. It could be a coach, or it could be a good friend, or somebody who just has a really good head on their shoulder that you consult with to take a look. Is the way I'm looking at this reasonable and accurate, or maybe am I looking at it in a way that where I'm distorting reality? And that's really important to get that extra help. The larger the community of counselors you have in your life, and I'm using counselors in the broad sense of friendships and mentors and things like that, the more effective you'll be in life. The more you're the lone wolf, then you have more areas where you're probably going to stumble and trip up. So I think going and checking out my perception of what's going on, it becomes really important. And again, with somebody who has a good head on their shoulders, who can give you some good advice. If it's within a business setting, finding some people in the business setting who are successful at what you're doing. When I first started counseling, one of the things I did is I asked around, found out who are the two people in my area who are really well known and successful as counselors. And I called them up. I said, "Hey, I'd like to take you to lunch." And I took them to lunch and I said, give me some advice as to how I can do what you're doing and some things that have made you successful. And those were very valuable conversations. And throughout my career, I've always recognized that there are a lot of things that I'm not skilled at. I've got some things that I can do very well. And especially from the business perspective, there's things that I'm weak at. And those areas, once I identify a weakness, I always try to find somebody who's good in that area to either hire them or consult with them so I can fill up that weak area. Because nobody can do everything, right? We all have strengths and weaknesses. Identifying what my strengths and weaknesses are extremely important. And again, that anger may just be saying that you need to do some homework in those areas.
Yes. And I would argue that most often anger comes into play, at least from what I hear in my community, that when we feel like we don't have control of a situation, or even ourselves, or maybe somebody else is causing us to feel out of control. And
Right.
so, what are some, we know, okay, we need to take action early, but what are some ways that anger can help, I guess, guide us to like regain that control?
Well, feeling out of control is obviously a threat, right? because we want to control what's going on around us. And again, I think there's two answers to that. One is the practical, which we've already talked about. Maybe I've bitten off more than I can chew, and I'm just overwhelmed. And in that case, you need to sit down and take a look at what are my goals, how do I reach them. Maybe I need to shift my goals. The other part of that, I think, is an existential answer, and that may be more than we want to get into. But again, what are my existential or beliefs about reality, about myself, about what's possible? We hear all the time that you can be number one, you can be the top of the heap and stuff. You can get everything you want. That's not true. People have limitations, and there's only going to be one person at the top of the heap. Most of the rest of us are going to be down there in the middle somewhere, right? Kind of accepting that reality and deciding, okay, that doesn't mean I can't have a lot of fun. I can have a big piece of the pie and I can enjoy a lot of stuff. But where am I at with some of that? And part of that kind of again gets into your existential beliefs about what is possible. Even the spiritual side sometimes helps people deal with mishap and stuff. Accepting the fact that you are going to get hurt in life and that there are things that you are going to fail at. And so, how do I deal with those? Well, I need to sit back and take a look at it, learn from it, and reset. And that's a big question, right? And we could do a whole program just on that on itself. Uh, but I think again, if you feel out of control, it's a message, right? It's a message that something's going on wrong, and that feeling of out of control may be due to what you're trying to do in business, or it may have more to do with your personal connections. I mean, one of the things when you look at positive psychology, the so-called science of happiness, one of the biggest things that accounts for meaning or for happiness in life is relationships. One of the things that people are terribly impoverished today in is relationships. We don't have that small community of close friends and peoples and mentors that people traditionally had when they lived in small towns and villages and extended families and all that type of stuff. People oftentimes are very isolated. The younger generation, especially when they get so involved with social media and all their friends, I got 500 friends on Facebook, right? But are they really friends, right? Can you really sit down and communicate with them on a very deep level, share things, or are you just getting curated fantastic pictures of everybody having fun? And they call that the fear of missing out that people have. And sometimes that can make people feel out of control. So why is it that you're feeling out of control? Is it because of something real going on? My business is going downhill. I don't know what I'm doing. Or is it because personally inside, I have no real human connection with other people to give myself meaning? I mean, those are the other two things, meaning and purpose. So relationship, meaning, purpose are what gives you that sense of satisfaction and being in control in life. And if you're missing in one or more of those areas, then you are going to feel out of control a lot. You'll have a lot of anxiety or anger, depression, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So it sounds like we're talking about self awareness, which
Right.
is something that, I'm constantly coaching about is self awareness. And I think that anger is one of those emotions that we need to be very self aware of, and when we're triggered or why we're triggered, how it comes into play in our lives. So, are there ways that we can become more self aware of when anger is at those earlier stages and the dial is down a little bit,
Yes.
before we get to the higher higher dialed areas?
And I think there's two ways of doing that. First of all, look at how you speak about your emotions. A lot of people hide from their emotions by using non-emotional vocabulary. They'll say, "Yes, I'm disturbed." Well, what does that mean? That's really a non-emotional. Are you happy, sad, angry? Use those types of words, right? Build an emotional vocabulary, or they'll use words that describe uh, situations. I'm confused. I'm feeling confused. Well, no, confusion is not an emotion. It's the fact that you don't understand something. Okay, I don't understand something. What emotion am I? Happy, sad, angry? What is the result of not understanding things? Frustration is another word that we use that way. I'm frustrated. Frustration is not an emotion, it's a condition. I'm not getting something I want. Because I'm not getting something I want, am I happy, sad, angry, right? Uh, so using emotional vocabulary becomes very important because a lot of people who are uncomfortable with their emotions, whether it's anger or some other emotions, they use this non emotional vocabulary. The second thing is becoming aware of your behaviors that are attached to different emotions. When I'm angry or I'm afraid, I have emotions that I do, right? Excuse me, I have behaviors that I do. And so look back to times when you knew you were really angry at something and take a look at what did you do? As same thing as times when you were really frightened or anxious, what were some of the behaviors you did? So for example, for me, I'll do things sometimes like maybe I'll play a video game, some useless little video game for a while if I'm mulling over stuff. Uh, there's a change in my vocabulary sometimes. My dad was a sailor. Uh, I don't usually use that, but sometimes that'll creep in. So, identify what are the things that you do when you're angry and when you're um, frightened or sad. And then when you see yourself doing those behaviors, then that's a message to you that there's that emotion. There's something going on in your life, either a loss, which is sadness, or some kind of threat that's causing the anxiety or the anger. And you need to take a look at that. And if I was dealing with a client, what I would do is I'd say, okay, well, what's been going on in your life that's been different the last few days or maybe week? And oftentimes they'll say, well, this happened with my spouse or my boyfriend, but it wasn't that big a deal. Well, your behavior is telling me it was a big deal. Maybe you need to address that. So, using emotional vocabulary and becoming aware of what my behaviors are that are attached to different emotions are a way to kind of reconnect with that emotional network. Because a lot of times people are very disconnected from it for various reasons. A lot of times it has to do with either modeling parents who were disconnected, or it might be growing up in an environment where being too connected was painful. Sometimes kids are taught not to, you know, feel things. Only dogs get mad, or things of that nature, right? It's not ladylike to get angry or whatever. Uh, so people are given messages so that they shut off their awareness of different emotions. So reconnecting to that network then allows you to access those messages that there's something going on that you need to take action about. And that's all emotions are. They're a way to give you energy and motivation to address a need.
So I think we've talked about a lot of big things today, big concepts, and if we were to take all of this information from today's episode and give one simple action that we can use anger as a benefit, what would that be? If somebody only listened to this, maybe 20 seconds of the episode, what would you recommend or where they start?
I think, first of all, just really understanding that anger is a message. And it's a message you need to listen to, whether we're talking about irritation or we're talking about being enraged. And the message is there's a threat or a need that's not being taken care of that you need to take care of. And so, what is that threat? How do I take care of it? Whether it's an external or an internal threat. That would be the basic message I have for people. In fact, all emotions, again, they're just messages that we need to take. We got some business to take care of.
Yeah. I like the way you said that. We got some business to take care of. Speaking of which, I would love for you to share about your business and how listeners can connect with you.
Well, I'm retired from active practice now, but I do have an active website, and I'm actually relaunching it. It'll be redone probably early in October. We'll be relaunching it, and I'll be starting a new blog series on that one. In fact, my first one's going to be on holiday anxiety, which is
Oh,
since we're moving
very
towards the end of the
appropriate.
year, right?
Yeah.
So talking about the different things that cause that. And I have a very active YouTube channel, and all of that can be accessed at whyemotions.com. So if you go to whyemotions with an s.com, uh, you can find everything that I'm up to and connect with me in that way. I should also mention I do have a new book going to come out next year on why you feel the way you do. And I'm real excited about that. It'll probably come out in spring, but it talks about all these things I mentioned early on about the different circuits that we share with animals the emotions they cause, how to manage them, how to deal with triggers, and a little bit about what makes you happy with positive psychology. So that's been a really fun project.
Fantastic. That is so exciting. Congratulations. I'm always very impressed by book writing, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool. Quite a project.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Well, thank you, Reneau. We appreciate, I know, as my audience and myself, this conversation about making anger your friend and ally, what anger is, and how it is related to setting boundaries and assertiveness. So, thank you so much for being here today.
well, thank you. It's been a real delight.
All right, y'all, it is time for the quote of the episode. This quote is from Unknown. If you listen to your body when it whispers, you won't have to listen when it screams. Take that into your week, your month, maybe even your year, and work on listening to what your anger is telling you, accept the message, and take action accordingly. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in my community. I'm so glad you showed up today, and let's go get there. Look at you, crushing it. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Tailor Made Tasty podcast. My hope is you always leave with a takeaway to implement in your own goal-crushing journey. I would love if you could take a moment to leave a review. And if you're looking for a community of goal boss badasses just like you, be sure to check out tailormadetasty.com/membership.